All right, all right. So speaking of this new series, this new amazing movie coming out called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. There is something that is quite the opposite of the unbearable weight of massive talent. Massive failure comes to mind. And I have here a list of the US military equipment left behind in Afghanistan. So, got a couple subsets here inside these big categories. So we have 208 planes and helicopters broken down as 110 helicopters, 60 transport cargo planes, 20 light attack planes, 18 surveillance and intelligence planes. We also have a total of 75,898 vehicles, which includes 42,604 tactical vehicles, 22,174 Humvees, 8,998 medium tactical vehicles, 1,005 recovery vehicles, 928 mine resistant vehicles, and just 189 armored tanks. As far as weapons are concerned, we have 599,690 total, which is a breakdown of 358,530 rifles, 126,295 pistols, just a small amount of machine guns coming in at 64,363, 25,327 grenade launchers, 12,692 shotguns, 9,877 RPGs, rocket propelled grenades, and 2,606 howitzers. And
Doesn't sound like much.
And you gotta remember, our president and chief citizen who knows best for everybody, not only here but also abroad. The next problem that he wants to tackle is guns in America, which I think is interesting because some people, they just want to buy the guns, but people in Afghanistan, they're getting them for free.
I do have to say, in his defense, I mean, the easiest way to 10x foreign investment inside a third world country, I think he just nailed. I'm not sure what kind of death and destruction it will rot, but you know what that means? It means that you can build new buildings because all of them will be destroyed.
Mm.
It's a new time to invest in infrastructure because you could sell those to like other terrorist groups, whoever's inside your posse at the time.
That's
and
true.
It makes the hair comrade Biden look really good.
Mm.
So, like, isn't this a positive thing?
Yeah, that's just these numbers are so astonishing, and I'm sure some of them are underestimates because the military is really good at, well, now three things. It was two things. They're really good at killing people and losing records, and now they're good at killing people, losing records, and leaving billions of dollars in equipment in other countries with no accountability.
So we have to talk about, like, is it just like a transport issue? Like, why do you think they had all these, like, leaving planes behind? It seems like you have a deficiency in pilots because or like fuel, which neither makes sense. But like, I'm just trying to like steel man this thing. Besides, otherwise I'll just go crazy, right? Like, there's just too much shit that was left behind.
Yeah, along with like a bank. We left a bank with gold and a absolute gratuitous amount of cash.
Like, what is this, like spring break 2020 or like what the hell?
Yeah, when you have like the Taliban taking over an amusement park and riding rides, you just you got to question if Elon Musk wasn't right when he said it's just statistically more likely that what we are experiencing is a simulation rather than real life, meaning we live in a matrix.
I'm totally fine with that being metaphorical as well, because for one, I'm just not buying the simulation theory. but that's my own concern. I'm not really trying to push that at anyone else, but like even metaphorically, it works. Or just like
I,
whatever the narrative is that we're being fed.
that entire thing could just be a false dilemma in the first place. If you accept anything as our creator, whether that's God or an alien or those are one and the same, your life, real life, is a simulation. So you probably could argue that they are the same. So both can be concomitantly true.
I feel like there's just some underlying logic to the term simulation that was probably misleading. Like
Yeah,
if it
maybe
just
that's
equals reality, then reality means nothing.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And I guess we just, because of our technology that we've created in the last 50 years, when we think of simulation, we think of, oh, I'm in a video game. But maybe that's just a very simplified, oversimplified version of what it means to simulate something. Because eventually, like our entire experience is a simulation inside of our brain, and we just have like all these amazing complex receptors that boil everything down into chemical and electrical synapses to create a really cool experience.
Yeah, so much so that we could take this new technology and just leave it in a country halfway around the world, I suppose. But I guess going back to
Oof.
the original thing that we opened up with, I do have to ask,
Yeah.
like, where did you get those numbers from?
I don't have a source for those numbers. They're just floating around, so I'm
All
sure of
right,
it.
that's no problem. Yeah, I mean, it's who's to tell anymore what's real and
I,
what's not.
even if they were labeled the official stats released by the US military, the US government, of course, those numbers were already passed through numerous filters and uh, approved, altered. Like if you go to any air and space museum, the flying altitudes and the max speed of all of our planes is not what they actually are.
Yeah, I mean, like part of the game is espionage, and I think that has to be like recognized and realized. And we as the public have to also like just realize that's how the game is played. It's like
Yep.
if you really think that the government's just going to tell you everything that's going on, then I'm sorry, you probably get sold mattresses very easily.
The people at the bottom are told that honesty is a virtue.
Yep. Yeah, and literally no one believes it. And I mean, there's a lot that you sacrifice for honesty, which I'm not saying that it isn't something to aspire to, because there's something about the communication in the scientific community that we kind of desire based off of honesty. But I think realistically, we have to view the point that we're like, we as the human animal benefit far too much from asymmetrical information.
Yes.
And we compete with each other over all sorts of, without sounding too reductive, like mating rights and resources and all this kind of stuff. So it's like we're just animals. And I think we need to make sure that we have that viewpoint when we're kind of thinking about like how the the powers at be, the countries at large, sort of function. But I mean, like we also need to talk about how this sort of transaction that occurred over there with us just piecing out at the very end started before the Biden administration.
Sure did.
I
Started
think
20 years ago.
I think it's important to like um kind of cover the fact that it's gone through like four presidents at this time, from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden.
Yep.
The entire situation has been snafu'd.
Yes, the system likes war for many reasons. It's a distraction. It's how nationalism can remain intact. It somewhat unifies enough of the people, regardless of how those motives and intentions were originally set up. It's kind of like why, in my opinion, we want to go to war with Russia, because once we go to war, then the reason doesn't matter anymore, and people don't care.
Right.
Like with Afghanistan, yeah, there's a lot of effed up stuff as we left, and those numbers, even if they're off by 50%, are staggering and shocking. And also, most people don't care.
Yeah.
I'm surprised at how little I care. And I should care more. And I'm looking at a map right now, and to answer your earlier question, there are many countries that we're allies with that we could move all of those, almost all that stuff, I would say fairly easily, with whether it's through different military cargo planes. Like we have India on one side, then we have Oman below. We have the United Arab Emirates, we have Qatar, and Kuwait, and probably India and UAE would be the safest, then Kuwait, then Oman. But I mean, it just obviously depends where you're at in the country. I know those are simplified statements, but it is probably possible to move all those things, or at least
Absolutely.
most of the big things. Like if you want to give your, I just can't help but think about the US and how tightly restricted so many purchases are. Like even owning a silencer on a weapon, you have to buy this expensive tax receipt, which is like $200 or $300 per item. And many gun peripheral accessories require a tax stamp or a tax receipt. And what that really means is not so much you paid money to own it, which in itself is a weird concept. Like, yeah, this is related to violence and you can have it, you just have to pay a little bit of money. That brings up some strange concerns. But also, the real purpose behind a tax stamp is now we have a record of it and we know who owns it.
Right. So if we ever have to, invade your home for whatever reason we come up with, we'll know exactly how much you're armed with. That's at least part of the idea. Not saying that it's the only one, but I think it's important to like going back to the drop off, the big foreign investment inside. The
FDI, foreign direct investment.
and I do kind of feel bad for laughing too, because it's obviously been very terrible on those people. And I think there's like no doubt that this war has, I'm sorry, this conflict, whatever they call it, it's not really a war, but whatever kind of cockamamie bullshit they come up with for just going on a horrific rampage in a different country, um, for various reasons. I think it's interesting to explore the various pathways to like why this is just, how could this have happened? So obviously our main was like, maybe it was the guy who was stuck with the bill. Maybe it was Biden. It was just Biden's ineptitude in his administration to do that. I unfortunately also see though that it could have been part of the transaction that Trump negotiated.
Could be.
And although I don't have any personal love for the man, I was always the person that like when he was brought into office in 2016, I always have this overwhelming feeling of like, I don't really care who the person is, who's our president. I just hope they do a good job. Because at the end of the day, I have to live here and my friends have to live here, my family has to live here, and I just want the best outcome for whoever it is, even if they seem like an unlikely candidate. But then I think it's important afterwards to do like a post-mortem on their administration and be like, okay, how effective was it? And it's incredibly difficult when I feel like the sensational media coverage of this particular administration, but this could be said about any administration going back, it's just been like at a whole new level of fuckery that
It
there's
is.
there's just no way to really parse out what's the real information, what things have been overblown, what things have been underplayed.
Yes,
All I can say from my own experience is that, you know, we have seen Trump as a media figure over the years. And like you've seen half finished hotels just left in various places throughout the world. And somehow a part of me is kind of like, huh, this looks kind of familiar. It's like, is this a golf course in Scotland? No, apparently it's just an ammo depot left in the Middle East.
I think part of this, you're making me think about the source of all this and the fact that there's this race in the beginning and then some sort of competition. No one ever looks at the aftermath or the evaluation. It's reminding me of laws in the United States and tax levies, where it's all about getting that in place. But once they're in place, no one looks at it 10 years later, 20 years later and says, hey, this levy we've been paying on, has that been effective? We only want to raise or lower taxes, but we don't want to evaluate what is currently in place. Like, hey, can we reallocate any money that we're already giving them? Because as time goes on, the number of laws net increases. It doesn't net decrease over time. We just want more and more, whether it's conservative or liberal. The march is stacking more and more.
Yeah, like the big fucking joke is like everyone thinks that by bringing in a Republican, we'll magically have some sort of, cuts in our administration, which has just never happened in the time I've been alive.
And they define a cut as less of a spending increase.
Yep.
We're going to increase at a lower rate, but we're still increasing overall. And so we'll create fancy terms like it's not, debt. We'll just look at like a deficit.
We won't worry about that number. I mean, I won't be around for that. That's like, their playbook. Unfortunately, there's like too many dominant strategies at play. I think that have just made this system go just wildly out of control. Like war itself could be a dominant strategy when you're the guy with all the weapons.
Yeah, as long as you can kick the can down the road.
Yeah.
Because you've never made it through a single cycle yet. That's the issue of, hey, we're going to print more debt and then we're going to print more money and then use these newly devalued dollars to pay off old debt. And as long as you never make it through a single cycle of that, like you never have to close that accounting book because the ledger is still open.
Yep. For our listeners, I think it would be good to say, just think of inflation as you're increasing the nominal price of an item without necessarily having a equal increase in your purchasing power. So like think of, conversations with your grandparents where it's like, I went to the movie theater back in the day and it was 25 cents and, I could have an extra 15 cents for popcorn or whatever. And nowadays we're paying like $6 for popcorn for a $15 movie. And it's one of those but minimum wage has also changed quite a bit. So it's like a weird sort of game that it has to be played with inflation. But the main point is that debt is always written as a nominal amount. So if you think about the broader strategy is that if you're able to cause inflation because of the Federal Reserve and you're, okay, maybe you're not directly in charge, but you have friends who are directly in charge and at least have influence. Because remember, the people who are running these organizations are party affiliated. We only have two parties that run this country. So like they're playing for one team or the other. And, there's also another debate to be had if they're even separate parties at all, if it's just one ruling party, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Just the point overall that I want to make is you have a nominal set amount for debt and you have a lever that increases the amount of money that you could be transacting in. So the idea is if we keep inflation going, then we can keep debt going.
Yeah, and it's just it's a very clever form of theft and breaking the financial system that we allow to occur and the government does because they are in control.
Right. And the evil part about this is that you take everyone's savings is also a nominal number. So just like debt, you will lose savings over time. which is
Yes.
good for them because they're the ones who own the businesses as well, or at
Yeah.
least, have friends who own the businesses. So if the businesses are the ones who are passing off all the costs on the consumers, we're also creating an economy which is completely based off of consumerism.
It's really genius. Whatever that number is in your bank account, over time with inflation, it's worth less. And that is exactly why the number that the government owes as debt is also worth less.
Yeah, and far from me to tell you how to live your life, and I'm talking to you, the audience in general, but if you can, I mean, really look into purchasing some sort of asset,
Yeah.
something that gives you something back over time, whether it's stakes in a business. It's like you have to be careful with stocks, and this isn't investment advice in any means, but just the general principle of having assets um, will replace the need for savings, because there is a need to have savings, but if your savings are being directly targeted and undermined, then this is your next best option.
Okay, then we can use the word savings and turn it into an umbrella term. Savings could be held in the form of an asset which will hold value for the most part.
Yeah, and and even though in traditional economics and business we've separated savings and investment to kind of mean two different things, I think that's perfectly reasonable to make the general tie-in to being like, this is your legacy. So you can keep a certain amount of, yeah, because you almost think of it as like, even though equity grows over time, there's still like a certain amount of that principal, which is your savings. So sure, absolutely, like an inherent value, which almost is nonsensical, as all prices seem to be relative, especially when you include inflation.
They sure are. We just live in an interesting, it's pretty much a circus, I would say.
It's really strange how yeah, I'm just like thinking that the amount of shit that was just left in that country, and like what could that possibly do either to the economy or to the politics there,
I
is completely unknown.
I just sent you in the chat a two other pictures that they're actually part of one thing, but so I do have a source for you now. This is it's probably a little bit of a different set of numbers. I didn't compare them against the original ones I said, but I will truncate or round to the nearest uh, understandable whole number here. And then, so this is from the US government accounting office. So these are, if we believe the information that was presented, these are actual numbers from the US government's accounting office. So we have about 22,000 Humvees, 600 M1117s. That's a form of like a military mine resistant vehicle, but not as good as the 150 MXX Pros, which are really made for mines.
Oh, that's
100,
like the Oshkosh ones, right?
the actual brand, I don't know if I ever knew that.
Okay. Yeah, it just has like the general shape of it. I'm looking at the image now and I'm just trying to relate to the customers, maybe if they are familiar with any of the terms.
If you know what an AMRAB looks like, looks almost exactly like that.
Yeah.
170 armored personnel carriers, 42,000 trucks and SUVs, 64,000 machine guns, 8,000 trucks, 162,000 radios, 16,000 night vision goggles and devices, 360,000 assault rifles. Assault rifles, those are the weapons that our current president wants to ban. And we just left 360,000 of them for a known terrorist group. 126,000 pistols, 176 artillery pieces, 33 of one type of helicopter, 33 of another type of helicopter, the Black Hawk, And so now there was a joke online that the Taliban has more Black Hawks than a lot of entire countries now. And then 43 kind of like surveillance helicopters for personnel. That is from the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, SIGAR. And then there are also fixed wing aircraft. So helicopters are rotary wing aircraft, and fixed wing aircraft are what you think of as a plane. So there are 4 C-130s, which is a big cargo plane, 23 Embraer EMBs, 28 Cessnas, 10 Cessna strike aircraft. And you got to remember, Afghan army, 300,000 soldiers by their numbers. And not a single shot was fired when the Taliban took over.
Man, I just have to say, like, this is an absolutely overwhelming amount of shit that you like. I'm just presented with all these figures. It's absolutely mind-boggling, especially when you know that, each one of those vehicles is hundreds of thousands, and if not millions, when you get to the aircraft.
Yep.
Like actual millions of dollars to make. And we still have homeless in this country. Like it's just like absolutely absurd in my mind. So like part of me, it has to feel that this is so egregious that it has to be part of the deal. It has to be part of the deal of leaving, that this is somehow either reparations or some other factor, like, hey, you can't leave our country because some other country make him come in, like Russia, and take us over. So I don't know if this had to have been like some sort of talking point, right? Like you can't be this absolutely absent-minded.
It would make more sense if it were part of an underlying strategy, and at least I would be more accepting of that. It's almost worse as a mistake. I have tossed around the idea, I don't know the likelihood of this, but if we wanted to, let's just say that the CCP has a lot of sway in what the United States does, whether that's from embedded people in our government in the United States or otherwise. So if we wanted to give them a bunch of stuff, what we could do is leave it in a location where they can retrieve it.
I see.
So this could be potentially a way to transfer all of these assets into the hands of the Chinese, because the Chinese can just go in there and then move all that shit to their country, because they have pilots, they have a very large military. Like, in all honesty, there might, who has more pilots, the Taliban or the People's Republic of China?
No, absolutely. I mean, that is a really wild, but I mean, maybe possible. I don't know. Like, I think it's important to note that like all the theories that were thrown out here, they're not meant to really necessarily give you more information. We're talking just about what ifs.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, which is very important, I think, in its own right.
It's a Gadanken experiment.
Yeah, to think more broadly on the Gadanken Afghan pullout.
The Gadanken dropped the ball.
I mean, it's, you have to, because you just look at these numbers and you're just like, man, I was wondering where that 30% of my paycheck goes every 2 weeks, and I guess it's there.
When you brought up,
can I have a Humvee named after me at least?
You bringing up homeless people in the United States is also thought-provoking, because if we help all the homeless people, what is the benefit to the power structures?
Nothing. If anything, it undermines them more, because you can't have people who are well off on their feet trying to grab the assets that you are also in competition for. If I want to just nail it so geniusly on the head like that.
Yeah, that's a very similar thought to what I was thinking, which is war benefits a lot of people. Sure, there are a lot of victims, but war benefits a lot of governments and grants them privileges, power, future control. Helping homeless people does just that. It helps homeless people. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy, and it's a very humane thing to do. And that is the right thing to do. But there's just so much money to be had with government contracts, defense contracts, war, controlling other countries instead of helping some people who are anything from down on their luck to drug addicted and struggling to find success because of their history of mental health disparities.
It's crazy that it seems like it's just a cascading um, domino effect from like war creating its own needs.
Yeah, war definitely creates its own needs.
So you have what essentially ends up being a concentrated effort to cause chaos. And then it's like they're buying and selling their own product, because they also manufacture order. Like that's kind of what the government sells as their product. They're like, you give us money, and in return, we create order. And it feels like by the government also having the ability to go to war, they are able to create their own demand.
Create your own demand.
Yep. And so the problem with having like this representational sort of democracy is that we're literally just like voting in elites, even though like, it's not like we really have any choices here. Or at least the people have been kind of negligent in this area to actually go out and vote for people who aren't part of this Ivy League power structure.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that just came to my mind that you reminded me of is the write-in vote. You're always allowed to do a write-in vote, but even if the write-in vote wins, if the person, at least in most jurisdictions, this is my understanding, if that person who was on the write-in did not file to run, then they will not be granted that position, even if they win the vote.
Yeah, it's just like at every corner, they have the luxury of being able to master this sort of very specific game. It's almost like you're watching a Twitch streamer or something like that who has absolute mastery over a video game. And you're like, well, you know what? Maybe I could do something similar to that if I put in 10-hour days at this one game over a 6-year period, which is exactly what happens in every walk of life, And there's like a certain beauty to be had in this free market of association where even someone who is like a decent, let's just say like a shoemaker, like maybe every doctor, lawyer, and engineer could make a better shoe than this guy if they put in the same amount of time and effort, but they can't because time itself is its own resource. So they've become, doctors, researchers, lawyers, engineers, and whatever. But the shoemaker is still there, able to like niche out a nice living for himself if he's creating a product of demand that the other people can then consume. So we have the situation where like the people who are rich have all the time in the world to master all of the nuances of the strange game called law.
All hail the cobbler and the haberdashery.
So like having more laws benefits them because they're the only ones who have time and resource and able to research them. Like if we had less laws, it would be a lot easier for a majority of people to master those laws
And there
in
is
society.
And that pendulum, I believe, can swing too far when the resources are so absurd. Like white people doing research in America and Europe, we're beginning to really study all of those absurd things, like anything that Mr. Paul likes to bring up in his government presentations, where we're spending millions of dollars to see if lizards can walk on a treadmill, to see if, I don't know, what one of them is like pigeons on cocaine, if they're more promiscuous or something.
Oh, right. I see what you're talking about. I was very confused. I was like, white researchers, what the hell are you talking about?
I think it's just, oh yeah, just like I guess Europeans and Americans who tend to be white who are in those research areas.
I see.
I guess it really doesn't have anything to do with being white other than they happen to be the demographic represented here.
But it's like one of those things that you might find on a Reddit, like white people do thing. It's like white people could easily solve homelessness, but instead spending millions of dollars to teach lizards how to walk on treadmills or at least study how they work.
Yeah, and that's also they're spending other people's money. So they're not only kind of misusing their own expertise because they're in a position where they're being paid and they're using their brain to produce an outcome that doesn't really benefit us as well as it could, whereas we could be paying them and giving them a budget to fix real problems.
Right. And like crowdsourcing could easily do that. I feel like a lot of our research, worthwhile research, can be done through crowdfunding. And even the not so what we would deem essential research could still be done as long as we have a good economic situation. Because there's a trend that's pretty famous in economics that as your household income increases, you start to value other things besides money. You start to value things like living in a good neighborhood, having a good car. And this effect is very common. So I think like the sort of mentality works where if you raise the median individual in society, you will have cascading side effects, which are probably net positive because you'll
And
have all those research things done without it being enforced.
and that's why you have to crush the middle class because they're a growing threat.
That's right. That's right. As burgeoning dictators of the world who are also aging out of existence, they have a set amount of time to enact their plan. But I mean, like, let's be honest. I know everyone thinks like it's ridiculous to assume that the government would be some sort of comical evil. It's like, oh, we're going to take over the world now. It's like, okay, that's actually what they're doing. Because if you were in charge of the most powerful military in the world, like, wouldn't that come across your mind at some point in time and be like, huh, maybe we could do this? Well, I got to twist a few things here and twist a few things there.
I think
And,
it's
or
a
it,
natural exploration. If you're Superman, then you wonder what I could do, even if I don't end up doing that.
right, absolutely. Because it's like, it would at least attract people of that mindset to those positions. Because it's kind of like its own free market thing too, involving labor. That
Sure.
people will, in a free market situation, people will go towards the thing they're most interested in.
And they'll
So,
choose the path of least resistance.
yep, absolutely. So you can see maniacal people if they have that drive, which they might, the world is very diverse. You can see them easily trying to become CEOs, going to any sort of real position of power. I think more or less we should be more concerned about how do we create and craft a game that prevents these sorts of like runaway effects, because we'll always have these people.
You speak of the gamification of school that Elon Musk wants to achieve.
I think it's a great idea.
He says, for those in the audience who are not familiar, basically, it's really hard and demotivating to do certain types of schoolwork, but how difficult is it to pull your child away from the video game console? It's really hard because games are fun. So if you can figure out a way to make school the equivalent of a video game where they're also learning, but it's as fun as the video game, then they're so incentivized to learn that you don't have to force anybody to do it because they want to do it.
Right. I think most of the time it's because we've tried to treat children like a very specific demographic that only has a maximum threshold for understanding. So
Hmm.
one, we're not adapting to the majority, or I should say like the wide variance of diversity, neurodiversity among children. Number two, they're just young adults as far as I'm concerned. They're going to be adults one day. And if you treat children more like adults, I think you'll get better results because you're respecting them and they catch on to that. So even though, yeah, they're still early in development, doesn't mean that they have to be like somehow diminutive and held in place. Because I always felt that growing up in schools, I always felt like I was held back um, more than I was helped. So it's like really, and I actually would give that credit to my parents because my parents really tried to prepare my siblings and myself for school. And so like I was reading by the time I was like 3, and we did flashcards all the time. So I knew my times tables and all that stuff really early on. So most of the schooling was boring, monotonous, not very interesting, complete waste of time. And I feel like that killed my work ethic.
I think you said it best a few years ago, where schooling, institutionalized learning, and standardized curriculums kills creativity and kills geniuses.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like designed to do that more than anything. It's like how I somehow feel too with hospitals. Like I don't know why hospitals aren't places of beauty. Like why are they this strange, sterile, very like business-like environment? It's like I thought you were trying to make these people better.
That's amazing. What a statement.
But instead, it's exactly like prison.
I am really going to have to think about this. Why aren't hospitals a place of beauty? I remember, like, so I've been in a hospital maybe twice as a patient, and I was always really cold. And like I remember before I got put under, so to speak, I was like a kid. I was so cold, and it was not a pleasant place to be. I just wondered, why does it have to be freezing? Like I'm in a freezer.
I know, and isn't it hilarious that like it's very easily recognizable that hospital and hospitality have the same root word,
Hmm.
and yet we don't treat hospitals like hospitality. Like there's a certain amount of service, sure, but
Well, I guess then I will rebuttal with the joke that hospital falls short of hospitality in both essence and in spelling. It's not quite there.
absolutely.
Hospitality.
I mean, like we also know the placebo effect works. So it's like, okay, well, you're not leveraging the placebo effect by making hospitals places of beauty for people to heal in.
Everyone who's there is forced to watch Space Jam.
Space Jam and episodes of Monk just on rerun.
Oh God.
And even though Monk is fine, I'm not saying anything bad about Monk. There's too much Monk sometimes, you
Too
get to
much
that point.
OCD.
Yeah, you get to that point in the motel or hotel that you're staying at where you're just like, man, I can only watch so much Criminal Minds. I can only watch so much Monk.
I am now a blood splatter expert.
This actually reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday with a bunch of friends where we were talking about how there's no excuse for radios to suck. But they've been playing the same 5 songs for the last decade,
Wow.
and it's frustrating because it's like, okay, well, instead of paying for the rights for those songs that everyone can just find on Spotify, you can get new talent, which is everywhere and is so in need of exposure that you could be doing a great service for the arts. But instead, we have a very controlling, institutionalized way of trying to um, even allow people to view creativity in art.
We're in such an exponential age of data and information creation. It's just noise overload. I think about this with satellite radio, where even though there's a giant screen that tells me the name of the station, like there's no way you don't know what station you're listening to. Even on the old radios, because there was a giant line and you tuned to that station. Or you can generally figure out what station you're listening to if you're at a place of work or something. Sure, there are exceptions. But still, I hear the announcers coming in every few minutes and telling me what station I'm listening to, the name of it. Like they're trying to push brand equity so much, and there's just too much redundancy.
97.3 The Banana.
Yes, exactly. That's what I just that bothers me personally.
And
I
then,
don't
like,
I don't like this feedback. I want just new stuff. It
yeah,
would be like
yeah.
if I just repeated this statement. It would be like if I just repeated this statement. It would be like if I just repeated the statement. Like move on. Let's keep the ball rolling. You got to keep the game here,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
right?
I absolutely agree. There's something to be said too. Like, I mean, obviously, that if you only have new stuff all the time, then not everyone's going to pick up on the stuff that you just played. But that's not what you mean. It's not like you're saying that it has to every time you turn on the radio, it has to be unique. It's more
Yeah,
like that there's a revolving sort of sense to this, like a gallery, like an art gallery.
you want the art, you don't want the filler.
Right. Yeah.
The people telling me what station I'm listening to. I understand that some DJs they can add to the content, but for the most part, it's like a self advertisement, which
Mhm.
I think is not necessarily patronizing, but just annoying, and I could do without. And that's the battle that we all fight: is trying to minimize ads, maximize content, which is an uphill battle as we become increasingly monetized, have profiles built about us. Everybody wants you to log in. Or I was going to a restaurant the other day, and it just I realized how complex everything was. I called ahead to get a reservation because I was about 20 minutes away, had some friends with me, and why go there and then give them your name and then wait when you can just maximize the efficiency? So I call them. They say, well, we don't do reservations, but we do have a call ahead wait list. Okay. So in my mind, that's the same fucking thing. So do you want to be on the call ahead wait list? I go, yeah. So then I give them my name, I give them my phone number. And actually, I got to back up a little bit. Before this, I'm greeted by a robot that tells me that I could download their app online and do all these things online. It's like, yeah, I understand that there's an application. There's a reason that I called the phone number. It's because I didn't want to use an app. I don't want to download an app for every restaurant that I choose to go to. Just want to call the number, give them my name, give them my number of people that I'm coming with, and then hang up. That's what I want to do. That should take less than 2 minutes. But there was about a minute of prompts about how I can go online to check things, how I can download a mobile app, and then I have to press 2 to speak English. I have to wait on the line to talk to somebody. Then I'm told that they don't do reservations, but they have a call ahead wait list. And then I get 2 different text messages from 2 different numbers. One of them is telling me that I should wait in my car until I'm at the front of the line, and then they'll tell me to gather my party quickly and come to the restaurant. The process was just so complicated. uh, I just was really baffled by all of this. It was really just, it was like the commercials for Bing search overload.
It's a very interesting sort of predicament because it's one of those things that, like, where we want such diversity and individuation, and yet at the same time we also desire some sort of like easy to access area that we can, you know, pick out all of these gems from, almost like a logistics to data. It's in the same way that Amazon does logistics for packaging. Like, they don't have to be the manufacturers, even though they do now. But they didn't originally. They were just kind of the network that kind of connected everything. Same thing with YouTube. You know, YouTube is like the reason why we're not operating solely off a website or something like that. Maybe one day, you know, it's like we have to actually download 2 platforms so people could actually hear what we're saying. So there's like an interesting mix of like people trying to stand out and be the, you know, industry lead, and yet at the same time, for a lot of people, I feel like they're expecting some sort of weird curated experience where they can choose from a variety of options. But like, choosing from a variety of options has to be presented like it itself is a service.
The battle for efficiency has so many different angles. It's really exhausting. And I have to fight it tooth and nail with everything that I do. And it starts like you can't give a centimeter, or they will take 200,000 miles because it's all in aggregate. Like if I took a penny from every single of the 300 million people roughly in America, right? I think that's 3 million. So it adds up. Like when I go to the gas station, I get irate when I have to choose yes or no for a car wash before I pump gas, and that I cannot just pump gas. That bothers me. But it also bothers me when a choice is presented as if I have to make it, even though it doesn't affect the outcome. So if I go to, for example, Walmart and Sheets, after I scan my items at the self checkout, there's a series of options that are presented to me where I can press on the screen for cash, I can press on the screen for credit or something else, right? So it's presented as if the process will not continue until you tell the machine what you want to do. But for some reason, a long time ago, I was upset at that. And I just inserted my credit card and then it read it and then it just jumps to the next screen. So why do I'm presented with these choices and then I have to like raise my arm and press the button, right? That's a small thing. That's easy to do, right? Yeah, but it's completely unnecessary because it doesn't. I've lacked the words to describe it because it's so ridiculous.
Oh
Like
yeah,
I put in my card and then it completes the transaction and then I move on with my day. Then why did it even ask me what to do on the screen?
yeah. Half the time, like when you go to a store or gas station or something like that, it's like, am I programming this device to do exactly what I want it to do, or is this device programming me? Like I almost can't tell anymore. Just go through my life, pressing these buttons in the exact right order.
Oof.
It's like it in and of itself is a soul crushing experience. It's like sometimes I would just rather have cash and talk to the cashier, you know, while
At
they're
least I
doing
feel
that.
human.
Yeah, at least I feel human. Yeah, absolutely. It's not just going to the vending machine so I could suckle at the nipple of, community or whatever it's being branded as these days. I say that tongue in cheek because I really don't feel like community kind of exists nowadays. Everyone's so plastered to their phone that um and they don't want to do exactly the thing that requires them to reestablish a community, which is to get off their phones.
Hmm.
I mean, I can't. I'm stuck on my phone all day. I'm stuck on fucking everything at work with emails and like I have to have essentially an entire monitor just for email and for chat because that's also very important apparently. Where I'm just like, I'm sorry, I didn't think I was working in the call center. I thought I was doing something else.
It is strange how things turn out like that. I once had a job where I was both customer service and also working for internally for the other workers of the company. So I would receive calls from people who worked there and from customers. And of course, I was doing the online chat assistance as well, and some other interesting things.
Is that like internal sales or something like that? I actually don't know what
Uh,
internal sales are. It's just one of those like terms that like I can infer what it means by its very language, but like what it actually means, I'll never really know.
yeah, like different departments within one organization where it
They just
has to
have
be
different
accounted
accounts.
for. Yeah,
Yeah, makes sense.
like
I get you.
capital being sold to the field
Yeah.
where it's still their technicians working on stuff.
So like, where do you go in accounting though for like 400,000 vehicles in a desert on the other side of the world? Is there like a department for that? Oh wait, actually, it's right here. It's at the bottom of this nice infographic. Isn't that amazing that we can all recognize this and everyone just does not give a shit? I don't even give a shit. It's surprising how much I don't give a shit. Like I'm upset and yet I also don't give a shit, and it's it's a very strange predicament to be in.
Yeah.
Where it's just at the end of the day, it's like you kind of sit down and you're like, man, why don't I care? It's like there's so many things I don't care about at the end of the day. And maybe that's exactly what they want. But what do I get for caring? That's the other problem. Is I can't just be like, oh, caring and sharing and community is great. It's like I gotta somehow, I don't know, retroactively convince myself otherwise.
But there is one thing that we care about, and that's for sure. That's our audience, and we thank them for listening.
That's true. We do really
Tuning in to listen to our Gadanken thought experiments.
Thank you very
Wow,
much, everyone. And we'll talk to you later.
and what would you do if you had 22,000 Humvees, 42,000 pickup trucks, artillery, assault rifles, night vision goggles, radios, and helicopters and planes?
I mean, the only real answer is I would have Humvees, but it would be like I would be behind it in a chariot, and I would have two Humvees tied to the chariot.
Then I would have two planes behind my chariot, so I could be like a pod racer from Star Wars.
Annie, no. Oh my god! And then instead of having like a javelin, you just have an RPG, which are just apparently sitting out there. I mean, like I know that you're supposed to dispose of dangerous things, but I like how the United States is just like, no, we're just going to dump this shit here. This can't hurt anyone. These things that are only meant for hurting people, nah, they'll be fine.
And make sure to leave millions of dollars in cash.
Yep, just waiting there. So I know we say goodbye to the audience, but this is the real goodbye now. Think on that. Chew on that.
We wanted to leave them with nightmares.
Yep, that's what we're good for. We're good at like making you feel pretty good and then also just leaving you with nightmares.